Okay, I'll share my screen and we'll look at this app that we have here. All right, so this is our node skeleton. I'm sure we've all seen this before, right? We love this thing. Has a bunch of files, and we start it up and we get this have fun with, is that a peanut or a potato? I think it's a potato. I have a feeling it's a potato. Okay. So it's pretty bare bones, not much in it, but there's some important points. The thing to consider first off is we need to have an env file. Real important. I think we all know that by now. We plug in all this stuff, not that hard, env file, and you start it up with your npm run. There we go. Local. And it fires up and you get some stuff. Okay. Server.js is the heart of your middleware or your backend program. And honestly, you don't have to touch this much at all to start to get going. So we'll start at the beginning. Read some environment. It actually reads your env file. That's all this line does. Picks a port if you haven't got one defined. Does some stuff with SAS. Does your express setup and other stuff. Nothing to touch here. Here's the important part. It builds a pool or a DB. I think I renamed it to DB, if I'm not mistaken. So it can be DB as well. We can call it DB. There. Either DB or pool. I think I renamed mine to be pool just because that's what it is. So I'm going to call mine pool. Totally doesn't matter. You may see DB in yours. So we build a new pool and we connect. As it turns out, this is actually optional because it's a pool. There's actually no need to connect the pool because a pool is actually a pool of connections, unlike a client. But it doesn't hurt to have it in there. It doesn't do anything really, other than if you're not connected, your app will crash when it starts, which I suppose is a good thing if it can't connect. So when it comes to line 15, you'll see bad things happen right there before you're getting that listing of port 880. Okay. Some Morgan stuff, some other stuff, Express stuff. Yeah, you don't care about this stuff. Nothing important. Sets are static directory, kind of important if you want to read images and JavaScript. So we have this. It just tells Express that the public folder is where I got my static files, files that aren't backend programs. Now they may be front-end browser programs, but this is Express. It doesn't care about that stuff. As far as it's concerned, those are all just dumb files. HTML, JavaScript, CSS, it couldn't care less. It'll just serve them out. And it will not execute. So anything in the public means don't treat them like programs, just fire them off when they're asked for. And that's it. Okay. Now we have these routes, the part that everyone just loves. We have two routes defined. We have a variable called users routes and one called widgets routes. And we are getting those from these two files, users and widgets. And we'll look at users in a second here. So we get this file. This is a function. So the users routes file exports a function, and that function is called users routes. And we can use that in our app, our Express app. We do app.use. And we tell Express what path or what base path to use for this route. And then we give it the actual function. We call the function. And the function returns an Express router. That's its job. So that's how this works. Users routes is a function that's defined inside users, and when it runs, it returns a router. Very important. And just for fun, we're passing it pool, or yours may say DB. It doesn't matter. So users routes is getting a DB parameter. Let's go inside users routes. There it is. It is in fact a function. There it is. Equals function. Now, you may not have seen it done quite this way. We have module exports equals function. We're not used to seeing that. We'd normally see const users routes equals function, and then you'd go module exports equals users, come on, users routes. This is kind of more normal, isn't it? This is what we've done all week 1 and 2. But it's the same thing. Here we just made a variable and then we exported that variable. So since it wasn't being used, there's not really a lot of need to have this users routes variable inside the file, which is why they just did this. They took that and just said, no, just go ahead and just assign it directly. If you like it this way better, go for it. It looks more self-explanatory. There's nothing wrong with that. So whichever way you prefer, but the way it comes out of the box, it comes with right there, module.exports. Okay. And what
Can I
about
ask something?
I see a question about using an arrow function.
I was about to ask, so if you define a constant variable like user routes before, can we have router.get in the same inside here as well? Router.post.
Yes, we'll talk about that in a second. So
Sorry. Okay.
let's get back to the question on the in the chat. So the question is, what about this way instead? Sure. Arrow functions. Oh, pool, yeah, or DB. I'll make it DB2. There we go. Absolutely. As we know, we can either use arrow functions or functions. Use keyword function, right? Totally your choice, or more specifically, perhaps the choice of the company you work for. They may say, no, all named functions use the function word like this. Why? Because that's the way your company does it. So tough, okay? Or they may say, nope, all named functions use arrow functions, so they have to be done this way. So, whoop, there we go. This way. There. So if your company has a policy, you can probably find out, probably tell you, or they'll let you know, oh, by the way, we use it this way. They are equivalent, as you know, except for one minor difference using this, but we don't worry too much about the this in these things. So totally yours. And of course, same thing, we could have gone module exports equals, come on, no function and the arrow. Also works. Totally up to you. I'm going to leave it this way because it makes it very, very obvious what is going on here. Okay, so I got a function, it's called user routes, and I'm going to export that function. And the function returns a router. So when you use the route, you get whatever it is that route returns, and users routes returns altogether, a router, which is what AppUse takes as a parameter. Okay, so that's kind of the basic plumbing of how these things work. And for the most part, we don't touch any of this stuff. It's not necessary. We can add routes, and we'll do a couple today. We'll add a couple more, or at least one more. Pretty easy to do. Okay, so but let's look at how this thing works. Now, here's a real key fact. The way it's written, it's actually jammed in pretty tight, isn't it? Which I'm not a big fan of. Those of you who've done mentor session with me, I tell you, give yourself some breathing room. Don't jam your code tight. So this kind of seems that, well, maybe I should put my another app get. Sure, we'll do this, and we'll put it outside here, right? And router.post. Yeah. And then you get this thing, post is undefined, or post is not a method, or something like that. And you go, what is going on? Why is post not a method of router? Where I've seen it 1,000 times. Well, the problem is it actually belongs in here. So all of your routes actually end up, or are supposed to be, inside here. There. I don't think I am missing a bit of an end here, so hold on. Let me copy this again. There it is. Forgot part of my post. And the end part as well. I'll copy the whole thing. There. Let me copy this get again. So I tend to put spaces in my code like this to make it really clear that no, this is a container. This entire function is one container where I put all of my gets and my posts and my puts delete if you have those as well. So I can do this, I can have another get. Let's say we're going to go get colon ID. I want to get a particular user. Okay. So all of your routes go inside the routes function, which takes pool as a parameter, as we know. So this pool is now available to all of these routes. And we can do pool.query or things like that. Okay, so this is how they work. So once again, we simply require the user routes, which just creates the function. So all the required did was build the function for us. And then app.use, we used the function and we called it, which of course gives back a router, which is what app.use needs. It needs a router. Okay, so not many changes needed to this particular file. I mean, server.js, you shouldn't have to change much at all other than perhaps add a couple more files. Generally one per table, that's oftentimes not the case, one per topic. We try to make them self-contained. So everything to do with widgets, I put in my widgets route. Everything to do with users, I put inside my users routes. And the question is, can you have a post in the same route function? You should, in fact, have it in the same route function. Yes, absolutely. That'd be a post. And then I have like no ID, of course. There. Yes. We would definitely have all of your routes. So all of my user routes would be inside this container. There is nothing below this. So once I return router, we're done. We cannot do anything else here. So it's really just one function in the entire thing, which contains all of your gets and posts and everything else you got for this topic. Try not to mix and match topics. So you got users and widgets, and you got products and resources for resource walls, or maybe you got food or menus. Maybe make a couple files like a menu.js, which has all things for menu, or an order.js, which is all things for ordering. So things like that. And the question is, what do we use widgets for? I guess you don't. It's just this is just an example file. You don't like widgets? There, it's gone. We don't use it. So this is an example, of course. So you probably wouldn't have. I don't think any midterm projects have widgets. So they just stuck it in there. So, but you want to make one for every kind of main object that you're dealing with. Okay. So let's deal with the users. All right. So there's our users. I've got another one called get :id. As we know, this allows us to get a particular user. So we know that we're going to get request.params.id, don't we? We know that if we do something like that in Express from TinyApp, we know that if I put :id there, I can use that ID, and that's going to end up as, I can just do this in one const id equals req.params.id. I know I've got that now because that's how this thing ties together. So I could, if I wanted to, is where id equals $1. And by the way, I don't know why they put semicolon. Don't put semicolons here. That's like silly. Don't put semicolons here. No one does that. There. It's not needed. Totally. Okay. We'll have the same route in both users and widgets. That will cause issues. Great question. I like that question. We'll talk about that in a second. That's a great question, actually, and I'll explain how that works. And the answer is no. There's no problem at all. Unless you declare the same base route, then you got a problem, and we'll talk about that too. So let's go back to our select where ID. So we know this, we've done this all week, where ID equals $1. So now we know that query is expecting another parameter, isn't it? It's expecting what? It's expecting an, it starts with a vowel, obviously, and yes, an and square bracket thing, an array. It is expecting an array because we gave it $1, and we know if we don't give it that array, it's going to really complain. It's going to say, I'm missing array. What are you doing? So we got to give it an array, and they have to match. $1 thing, one parameter. They got to match. There. It's not bad. Select users where ID equals $1. And I'm probably going to return the single user. I'm going to go user equals rows 0. Why not? And I'm going to return just the user. Here they're wrapping the whole thing in users as well. So I'm just going to put my user as a single object right here. I don't need to have there, just for fun. Okay, all right. If you use ESLint on, will it fix things properly for these pools? Oh, no, it won't. It won't fix it. Anything bad? Probably not. I mean, it might like an auto format. Of course, you've all seen the auto format, right? Like really bad formatting, looks like crap, like that, like, oh, horrible. We can go right click, format document. There we go, there. And all's forgiven. We like that, don't we? In fact, even if you're missing semicolons, I've got mine set up. Let's say I'm really lazy and just like one of those people that just does not do semicolons, which by the way, you lose marks for that. So, or not consistently. Remember interview number 1, right? Semicolons, be consistent. So I've got some semicolons. Let's just go right click format document and look at that. Puts them all in there for me. Great. That's a setting in VS Code. Just look for the word semicolon. You'll find it right away. Great. So, and the same as, yeah, you can too. But usually I do it myself. Just format document. That's like my favorite key. Like I've got it like Alt F. Like seriously, I use format document all the time. It's just so, I'd make it F if I could, but I need F for typing, right? So, okay, so now I've got returning the user. I've got 2 routes. I have a get slash and I have a get slash ID. Now let's look at how Server.js will use this. Now, here we go. API slash users route. And inside users, I have slash. So what this means is if I go to my browser, let's open up another page just for fun. There. And I go to localhost 8080. And I go to, now if I go users all by itself, can't get users. Why? Because it wasn't users, because the base URL was API slash users. So I have to go to API slash users. And what's the difference, you ask? I'll talk about that in a second, but there is actually a difference. There we go. And I do, in fact, get a list of users. In fact, I get an object with an array in it, interestingly, because they actually wrapped everything inside another object and called that object, called the array users itself. So that's the way it's bundled up here. So we have an object being returned with an array named users, and the array is the list of users. Okay. So that is what your API slash users does. Now let's see if I have this, if I have, I don't know, main, just for fun. Why not? Now I have slash main. So what is my URL going to be now? Well, it's going to be slash API slash users slash main. So now this doesn't exist. I'm going to get a 404. Cannot find. It's users slash main, and it works. But we don't normally do that because this is a get. It is users slash. It's self-explanatory. I don't need to put a get. You'll oftentimes see get is like this, or a get, which is really redundant. Like, why would you put get? Like it is a get. Like, why would I do a get on a get? It's not really necessary, is it? So just a slash. Okay. So now here, as we know, these can conflict with each other inside a route. If I got another get, what's going to happen now? What's this is kind of odd. Not so good, is it? So let's see which one works. Which one is going to fire? Do we know? I've got 2 slashes. They both look for API slash users slash, and the slash just means nothing after that. Let's give it a try, see what works. If I go get, if I go /1, will it in fact get me my 1 or my all? We got a few votes. Let's get some more votes on the chat line, shall we? Come on. Who votes it's going to get 1 user? Who votes it's going to get all the users? One, got one. Because it was the last one. It was the last one defined. So does it override like an object does? Or does it say I've got one already, and will it simply ignore the second one? There's a bit of a dilemma. We know that objects just you replace, but we know things can get ignored too. So yeah, this is bring back a trauma from Tiny App, right? Like both. It has to do both. Yeah, maybe it does. I don't know. Let's give it a try. Let's take a look here. So /1, which is it gonna run? It's thinking. Oh, go /1 there. Okay, enter API/user/1. Okay, so users all by itself. What's it gonna get? Oh, it looks like it got the first one. Did I get any errors though in my? I didn't. So it looks like the first one wins. There we go. First one wins. Second one, sorry. Unless you're first, it's like what? Be first or go home. Sorry, we don't accept second. We don't accept second place here. So first one wins. Okay, so in this case, it's a :ID. Well, now it might work. Let's try it. Now if I go /users/1, now this is a different route. This one doesn't apply anymore, I think. Let's take a look. Am I going to get my user? And I do. I get my one user. I get Alice. So this would be a great login. I suppose I can call it, how about if I call it login? I could do this, but we'll talk about why I probably shouldn't do this. Oh, new. That'd be a post, wouldn't it? I could make a new post for a new, but that would be a post. And I haven't got a form built for this yet, but we could certainly do a post as well. And you've done that before in Tiny App. It really be exactly the same. So here's a great fetch the single user. So far, so good. Okay, now let's talk about this. API/. What's that mean? Why is it not just /users? Why am I calling it API/users instead of just users? What the heck's the difference? Anyone want to hazard an opinion as to why we call it API/users and not just /users? Why on earth would we do that? Any idea?
Maybe because we are retrieving data from the database.
True, but we could certainly make one call users that retrieves data from database, this way. I mean, that's a good point though, but we don't always do that. Sometimes, like in Tiny App, we didn't use API/, did we? We just had what was it? Come on, anyone remember from Tiny App? We had lots of slashes, didn't we? Short URL, yeah, all these things. We had URLs, yeah, URLs, that's right. So there's a slight difference or a pretty important distinction when you use /API. Yeah, great, Don answered, great. When you get JSON back, if you're sending JSON, then it's /API. Let's make another row called users. Let's make another one and we'll call it just users. And of course we need the route. So by the way, I'm going to build myself another route now. There. I'm going to call it routes. I can't call it users. It's a bad one. I'll call it test, just for fun. Just test. I'm going to make a test file. I'm going to call it test routes. Do not use this name, by the way, unless you're actually doing tests. And I'm going to use my test routes. There. I have a thing called test routes. I need a file, so I'll make a file. And since I'm lazy, I'm going to copy the file. Come on, copy and paste. And I'll call it test. Oh, test. There. Test. What do I server call it? I call it test. Okay, I got a new row file called test. Looks a lot like my users, doesn't it? Like, of course, it's the same. So I got to make some changes. I'll just do one get in it. There. It's going to do a get. It's, by the way, going to do exactly the same thing. No difference, except I just said /users. So my tests should probably not return an actual JSON, it probably should return just something else, anything but JSON. Should probably should not return JSON. Should probably return there. Text. There. I suppose I could call it text as opposed to test, but anyway. So I'm going to return just plain old text from my route. So I have my data, and I'm going to res dot send, or maybe end. Res dot end. This is Express. I can do the same as TinyApp. Res dot end, and I can send users 0 dot name. There. So I'm just sending one of the names, or the name of the first thing, as text. Actually, it's HTML, but we know that because it defaults to HTML. So now this route, all it does, it gets the users and it sends you back the name of the first user it found. It's totally useless endpoint, but see how it works. So let's take a look. I've got that. Let's see if I can actually do this. Let's go slashed, what did I call it? I'm going to call it /test just to be there. Okay, we'll go /test. So localhost 880 /test. I got Alice. Plain old text of Alice. So it wasn't sending JSON. So if you have, now of course, let's say you had some views and some EJS, they are also not JSON. So you would also make any route that sends EJS would just be a /something. So you'd have a /login page, if we're making a login page, which by the way, you know we're not. That'd be a /login, which would send you a login page as an EJS. But if it's going to send back JSON, it would be /API /something. And that's the distinction. That's all. All right. And, oh, do we need to send this data? You could. You sure could. As we know, I'm just literally just sending back the text. But yeah, we could do a res.render, .render, sure, and do all kinds of stuff. Right out of TinyApp. It'd be the same thing. Give it a file. I haven't got one, so I can't do one right now, but it's pretty easy. So, all right. So there's a simple route. Let's make ourselves take a look. Let's try now to use one of our JSON routes. We have these two routes, API/users and API/widgets. Widgets, it's not much, it shows widgets. I'm going to look at our code. So let's now take a look back to our main page. Where's our main page? Come on. There it is. Okay. Does it still work? Still works. And now we're going to do an Ajax call from the front end to the back end. So what we want to do is we're going into our file right here. So if you look at this code, we have our views and we have index.ejs. And in this index.ejs, it doesn't do anything. It just has a body and an h1, really empty. Well, but we do have the jQuery library included. And as we know from Tweeter, we can add all kinds of fun stuff. So why don't I simply add some stuff here? I'm going to add a div there, and I'm going to put a button here. There. Click me. Let's take a look and click me. There we go. Does nothing. I'm going to change my style. I think this is set to flex, so I think it's going sideways. Let me just quickly adjust my style. Have a feeling that this layout is, yeah, it's doing flex on the body. I'll just remove that for now. There. Okay. Doesn't look quite so nice, but it's easier to deal with. There's my button. Click me. All right. Let's go ahead and make something display on the screen when we click me. And we're going to have our click me do an Ajax call to our /API/users and display the users on the screen. Totally useless, but it shows the principle how this would actually work. So back in my index.js, I'm going to now have a place to put my users. So I'm probably going to make, likely I'll make another list. I'll make another div here. just to make these things split out. And I'll make a UL there. And that's it. So I have a UL, which is now invisible because it's empty. There it is. And I have a button. Now this is jQuery. So there's also an app.js, which is the jQuery code for this particular page. So under public, I have my scripts app.js, and there it is. So I know in jQuery, I can make this page do anything I want. Now I can do when I click on stuff, I can load stuff, all kinds of cool stuff. So what's the first thing I want to add to my app.js knowing that this is jQuery? What's the first thing I should add? And by the way, it's always the top of the file. Document.ready. Exactly. A document.ready. And we know there are various ways to write it. You'll see it done lots of different ways. It's a function. So it is the dollar function because everything is jQuery. And as we know from yesterday, we could have said this. We could have actually said jQuery, but no one does. Like, no one does that. But you could. We use the dollar function there. And the dollar function takes as a parameter a callback. This will get called when the document is in fact ready. And all your ready stuff goes in here. So there's your document.ready. Okay. So let's verify this worked. We're just going to console log. Console log ready. I like to do things like this because I'm not sure if it works. I want to satisfy myself, is this in fact working? So let's go ahead and refresh our page. It should say ready when my page loads, shouldn't it? Yeah, let's refresh that page. Come on. Make sure I got ready. Console log ready. Make sure I got it. Try this again. Oh, logs. There it is. Ha, logs turned off. Ready. There we go. So it did in fact say ready. I can hide those there. So great. When I refresh my page, it does in fact load and then it says ready. So I know my document.ready is in fact firing. So now I can do stuff. As we know, in our document.ready, we put our handlers, don't we? We put the things that do stuff in our page. Well, I've only got one thing on my whole page that does anything, do I? And that is the button. And that's it. So let's look at my button. I should probably give it a class or an ID or something, because otherwise I have no way of getting it. I mean, I could do this. I could do dollar, and I could say button, but that would hook every single button in my app, and that's kind of scary. Although in this case, there's only one. But I'm going to be, kind of responsible for once, and not just go dollar button. I'm going to go give it an ID, which is not the best choice either, but it's better than going dollar button. And I'll call it, what should I call it? Click. Another terrible name for an ID. So ID equals click. So now I can grab that thing inside my app. Dollar, pound, click. Now I want my button to do something when I click it. What would I use? What can I do? It's going to be dot something. Dot what? Dot on. Yes, the good old dot on. Dot on, which is our new generic event handler. And it's going to on click. When somebody clicks that button, it's going to run a function. I think I need a function. So let's make a function. Put it down here. Good place for it. We'll make a function. We'll call it on click. We're trying to set a record for the most terrible names for functions right now, but it's not bad because there's only one here. So, okay. Right. Hashtag. Yes, pound. To me, it's a pound. Hashtag. That's just too hard to say. Like, yeah, pound is easier for me. Right. So on click. I got a function called on click. So I'm going to call my on click function with a capital C when my button is clicked. And let's make sure that happens. This is how I do it. I actually do my console logs first. Clicked, exclamation mark. So now when someone clicks the button, it's going to console log clicked. Press my page. get my ready and click me. I got clicked. Something's happening. I've actually got life in my app. I can click. Look at that. 1, 2, 3. We have life. Okay, so now looks like we do have the basic plumbing in place. Now we can go ahead and have our button do something. So we are going to do an Ajax call. Now I think we talked yesterday about how we should probably, the proper way to do an Ajax call and the easy way. It is not going $.ajax. That's the really hard way to do an Ajax call. There is a much easier way to make an Ajax get. And what is that? What's the easy, fun way to do an Ajax get? Anyone? What's the easy, fun way to do an Ajax get in jQuery? Ajax.get? That's pretty close. .get, yes. It is in fact $.get. $.get. There. It's just $.get. And $.get expects to get what you want to fetch. So mine is going to be /API/users. There. API/users with the quotes in the wrong place. There. .then. It is a promise-based module. .then. And .then I want to do something when I get my stuff. So I'm going to get my data and my stuff. There. So when I get my stuff, I'll use my stuff. So why don't I go ahead and just log my data? Log my data. Do I in fact get some data back when someone clicks that button? Okay, let's give it a try. Refresh the page. Here's my ready. Okay, let's go ahead and click me. Oh, clicked, it fired click, and I did in fact get back an object, which was an object containing an array called users, which had my 3 users. So that's great. 3 lines of code, and I got my Ajax call. Okay. So it is in fact working. Now I can actually make something happen with my data. Okay. Right. The question is, can you use this if you have to run multiple queries? You could. We know from our good old promises that we can just chain a promise, can't we? We could do a .get here. Return $.get something else. Let's try this. Get, we'll go widgets. Widgets. Not commonly, API/, not commonly done. You try to tailor your backend to your front end so it only has to make one call. So you'd rarely see something like this, okay? And now, of course, we're returning something from promise. Anybody remember last Friday? We talked about what happens when you return something from a promise. What happens to it? Come on. There's a catch, but this is the return from a then. When I return from a then. Come on. It was only 3 days ago, 4 days ago. Come on. What happened? We returned from a then in a promise. What happens to it? It returns a promise, but what does that mean? What does that mean? That means the next then gets it, right? That's right. The next then gets that stuff. So it gets data, and it's then is going to get that stuff. So log data, it's going to get this return. Let's take a look, right? And data twice? Yes, we can. It's a different data. This data is only scoped within this function. So this data only exists here. Outside here, it vanishes. It's gone. So this is a different data from this data. And can you use both? Yes, you can. You would probably set a variable here, maybe. You know, const stuff there equals object. And just stick your data here too. Also works, right? Then you'd go ahead and you go stuff.data equals data. Really bad naming, I know. There. And now you got your stuff available all the way down. That's the simple way. There's other ways, but this is actually an easy way to do it. Okay, so let's take a look. Now we're getting 2 things. I'm excited. Let's give it a try. I should now log 2 things inside my file. And I did. Users and widgets. So I can do multiple fetches. But I must stress that you would not commonly do this. You should have your backend person construct a nicely crafted object that you can just use. This is considered kind of bad practice, having to do 2 gets inside the front end. Bad stuff. Okay. So if you have a backend developer saying, just do 2 fetches, you tell them, no, that's a bad practice. Give me my object. Give me exactly what I need. What I need is an object with users and widgets in it, so I do 1 fetch. And backend people should know this. They know that it's 1 fetch. You craft your object that you send to your jQuery or later on your React specifically for what's using it. So let's just take this out. So right now I do just need the array. So I do have pretty well crafted there. I have my users here, my data object. Okay, so now I know I've got my users inside an object. So if I click there, I do get a object with a users array in it. Now I'm ready to actually do something with my users array. So I'm going to probably make a function called render users. So I'm going to call render users with my data.users, because once again, data is an object that contains an array called users. So I can't render data because it's an object. I have to use users. Why is that? Well, that's because the users wrote returned me an object. If I had just done this, then that users route returns an array, but it's not. It's returning an object with an array in it. That's all. What does render users do? Great question. Great segue. What does it do? Well, it sounds kind of familiar. Anybody remember render something we did in another jQuery app like ages ago? Anybody remember? We had a thing called render. Yeah, Tweeter. We did a render thing, didn't we? It was called render something. I can't remember. Render potatoes? Render tweets? I think it was render tweets. It was render tweets, wasn't it? Yes, render tweets. So this is a render user, so it probably is going to display the users on the screen, isn't it? So okay. So we need another function. There. There. We'll call it render users because it's a great name. And we'll say users. It takes users as a parameter. Well, now this is a lot like Tweeter, isn't it? I'm going to get my container, and where's my container? So go to my EJS. Now this is where I want to put them right inside here. But I need something to grab onto, right? All I have is UL, so I'm going to need something, aren't I? A class or an ID. Bad practice to go to UL, so I probably should go ID again. Let's be really bad form here. ID equals, we'll call it users, container, or user container. There, we'll call it my container. So I have an ID called container. So now I've got a handle I can grab onto in jQuery. Go back to my app.js, and I can get that container. Const container equals $ function, and I've forgotten already what I called it. Oh, container. Okay, well, there we go. Of course, it's okay. Hashtag container. I like pound. Sorry. Okay, I've got the container. Now I can do a for user of users, just like tweet of tweets of users. And I can append or prepend to this container. So let's go container. And by the way, you will often see the variables with a $ in them. That oftentimes that's a convention used to indicate this is a jQuery object. Totally up to you. Just be consistent. I think I'm not using, what am I using here? Click. I haven't made a choice yet. Okay, I'll use $ in mine. So I'll use $ in my variable names. Okay. So it's going to be $container. Container.append. And I got to append something, some kind of HTML. Well, let's just make it the easy way. We'll just put it right in there. There. So we'll put it in here. It'll be list item, close list item, and I'll put the person's name right in there. User.name. Name. Great. Okay. So it's going to append user.name. Looks like it might work. I mean, so I got my click. I'm going to go ahead and get my users. I know that works because I logged it already. I'm going to call render users. I know that's an array. I'm going to go for user. Oh, looks like it might work. Any errors? Not yet. Okay. Click me. And let's take a look. Users undefined. Oh, what line? User of users. Users. Oh, users. Yes, of course. Users. There we go. Oh, typo, right? Okay, try again. Look at that. So it is in fact working. So now when I click on my button, it is now changing stuff on my page, just like a tweeter. Of course, I'm not emptying my container, am I? So it's just adding more and more. Maybe I should do empty. Sure. Okay, let's do container empty. Container, the dollar. I think there's an empty function. I'm pretty sure you can go empty. Anybody remember that? I think you can. Or just value or HTML equals blank. We'll try empty first. All I can do is crash, right? So, oh, now it's working. I'm emptying and refreshing. But I'm doing a call to the database every time now. So if my database changes, of course, now I get different data. Okay. So that's how they tie together your front end and back end, at least in a single page app. And I do encourage you to get used to doing it this way. This page never changes. So there is no need for a cookie, is there? Since it's a single page app, there is no cookie. Then you say, well, how do you know what user's there? Well, you would have a variable called user. Const user ID. I go let, I suppose. Let there. And since in jQuery, all of the JavaScript is one big, huge, enormous page. Every variable is available to every file. So that user ID is now available to every jQuery file. Okay. So you would just set some state, which is a great topic we'll talk about in a couple weeks here in React. This is what's called state. It is the state of the user ID. There is a concept of the current user. There it is. It's called user ID. This is, once again, this is the front end, not the back end. This is now only in the browser. It is setting a variable called user, not used, user ID. And maybe in some, thing you'd click login, a login button. Let's make a login button. I'm glad you asked. Let's make ourselves a login button. Let's go here. I like this. Let's make a button called login. Login, and we'll say login. Login. And that's it. We're not going to get username and password. It's just basically a dumb login. That's all it does. I mean, I could put some other stuff, but take a look. So now I'll go to my app.js. I'm going to do the same thing with my, there, pound login is going to be on click. I'm going to call a function called, well, I guess I'll call it login. On the front end, this is on the browser, not the back end. It's going to call some function called login, which I'll write right now. And let's do the same thing. There. Oops. We'll call this function login. There. We know the click works. Now it's going to go API/users/ID. I'll get user number 2. I could have made it where name equals as well. So I could have changed this in my users to say another one /name, but then I got to make a choice. It has to be press name/name because I've already got one with colon ID. So I'm going to just do a colon ID for now. Okay. So I'm going to look for user 2. It's just test. So I'm going to go ahead and get user 2, and I'm going to set the current user ID equals my data dot user. Actually, no, it's data dot ID, because I believe my user endpoint returns, it returns just the object itself. So inside this is going to be ID and name, which we tested earlier. So this should just return a user object which has ID and name. So my app can just set this global thing to user ID. Okay, and I can probably, can I show it someplace? It's not really React. I can't do it automatically. Let's take a look. Maybe in my, I'll do it here. In my username. Okay, just for fun, we're going to user ID. This is totally useless. We're going to put the current user ID's ID before the name. Totally useless. Okay. So right now it should be undefined. So undefined, which makes sense. So there is no current user logged in. But if I log in, which means I'm going to call, this is my login now. I'm going to call API users 2. I should get back a user object with an ID in it. Let's take a look. We'll console log that. Login. Oh, I did. I got back an object with an ID in it. So now, if I query my variables, I should be able to go log or console log dot log, come on, log user ID. It is 2. So it did in fact get changed. So if I click on here now, let's take a look, and I do this. There we go. The current user is now set to 2. So for a single page app, you don't need a cookie. Just have a variable. That's your user, and you're good to go for the life of that app until you close this window or you change that user ID. That user ID is going to stay 2, or I log into somebody else in this case. Okay, so that's how we work the front and back end together. Okay, you try to craft your route, in this case users, to be exactly what the front end person needs. That's why when we have, what if we refresh? Oh, good point. I refresh, everything gets destroyed. Now my undefined. Yes. So, but that's the same with any app. jQuery, React, anything. If you refresh the page, it's gone. You lose everything. Now we know there's ways to trap that, where it'll say, hey, you're trying to leave the page, you want to do this. But in general, if you reload the page, unless you have some other mechanism in place, which you can do, by the way, you can set cookies, it would just lose everything. It's a single page app. But there actually are ways to save that. You would save it maybe in user data, for instance, or user storage, a bit easier. Okay, so I log in, and now when I click me, I get 2, because 2 is the current logged in user, which is Kira. So once again, you try to craft your object that your backend developer is sending to what the front-end developer needs. It's like you were either, if you're a one-person project, you wear different hats. You put your backend hat on or your front-end hat on. Or if you are separate people, you would say, okay, you tell the backend person, I need an object that looks just like this. Please send me that. And the backend person, middleware, they go, okay, I will send you this. Or, oh, I can't really do that. How does this look instead? And you go, no, don't want that. How about this? Okay, I can live with that. So eventually you come to agreement that I will send you exactly what you need and your app will use that. And the way we do that is this. Let's say I hadn't got this written yet, but I've got a front end person who's just dying to get my stuff. So let's go to our test. Where's our test route? And this is actually kind of fun. Let's say there. Test/stuff. I have a route called test@stuff, but I've got a problem. My front end person is like dying to get their stuff done, and I haven't got my database tables written and my queries done. And I was like, but he's saying, come on, what's with you? I need to. I'm stuck here doing nothing. You got to send me an object so I can do my stuff. Well, you could pull an all-nighter and like build the tables, populate the seeds, get the schema going, build some queries and do your pull dot query, or you can just do this. Why not const data equals and just send them an object. So ID for name, oops, Alice Blake or something there, and age is 28 there, and dog's name is Oscar, which is my dog's name. Okay, there we go. There, and you and send that. Res.send. Send them that thing, or JSON, I guess. In this case, it'll be dot JSON, and send that thing to them. Your job's done. 5 minutes of work. You've already agreed what they want, haven't you? So they know what they expect to get. So just make one and send it to them. Now they can continue with their development without having to worry about your stuff. So let's take a look if this works. Let's actually go to our page and see if we can get our stuff. Now I'm going to make a new tab here, localhost 8080. We'll make sure this route in fact works. And this is API. This is the, oh, okay, this is just test. So /stuff. Okay, so this endpoint works. It's not API, but that's a minor point. It works. So you can demonstrate, you can say, okay, look, here it is. You can go / and it's working. So your job's done. As the backend person, you have delivered to them what they need. They can now go ahead and do their work. So now they can go on their front end. And since all they do is a $get, they have no clue that you faked it out. They think you're a genius and did it in 5 minutes, when in fact you just did this. You just said, yeah, there you go, there's your object. But they don't know, they just think that you did all kinds of work. But they can then go ahead and in their code, they can have another button that does from stuff. Let's take a look, where's our app.js? So now I'd go, and put this, I did the wrong click, don't I? Okay. Test.stuff. I'm going to change this a bit. And instead of this, I'm going to put this right here. I'm going to be doing the really shortcut way. There. $container dot append. It's not going to be great. Oh well. And I'll go data dot dog. There. Because I'm going to get data dot dog, and I'm going to put text in my URL. It's going to look like heck, but it's going to work. Okay, test that stuff. Okay, let's give it a try. I got Oscar. Great. Wow, this guy's a genius. He built me a middleware endpoint in like 5 minutes. Wow, that's great. Of course, they don't know that you just simply faked it out with some test data, just like this. So that's a great practice. Get your agreement between your front and back end person, what they want to get. Once you've got that, build yourself a really quick and dirty route that just sends that stuff to them, and then worry about building it with the select later, because this gets you going really, really fast. It's called stubbing out. We stub out the routes in development. Makes for very fast development. And then you can get your SQL working behind the scenes in your branch, get it working, switch it out again, and no one's the wiser. They just know that you got it working. Any questions about this stuff? I know there's a lot of work to do the next couple of days in midterms, but this is a good approach. Make sure you have your front end and back end clearly separated. You know who's working on what. When you're working on the browser, it is front end software. When you're working on the back end, it is back end, sending JSON or perhaps EJS as well. Any questions on this? How are you supposed to manage the data a user can see without, well, show them what they want to see? Like, how do you manage it? I want them to see Oscar, so they see Oscar. I fetch what they see, and Oscar, oh yeah, of course, I haven't done a clear, have I? Oh, look at that. That's so cute. Oscar was like this big. He's really small. So of course, you know what user's logged in, don't you? Because you can send back every time the user ID in your query as well. You can set cookies in single page apps. It's a bit trickier, um, but ideally just send the ID along. Just send the user ID or send all the information needed for a stateless query at this point. It's much easier doing sessions with JSON. So if you need to tell your backend, this is user ID 2, how do we do that? Well, we just send user ID along with your query, right? Just send in there so you know which one you're sending. If it's a post, you can send it as data, or you can include it in your query as well. So, okay, all right, everyone. And what if you have a guest user without any login? That sounds good too. Sure. So then, if you don't have any users, don't use users. Even easier, you don't have to have anything with users at all, or you just have a page that doesn't require users at all. It just fetches the stuff. So, all right. Any other questions? I know this is a lot of work. We do this on purpose. In 1 week, getting things going with getting back end and front end working. Make sure you get the core functionality. Event prevent default. Yes, we use event prevent default if it's a form post. Now we don't have a form here, do we? We just have a button. It's strictly just one single button. It's not a form. But if you had a form here with a submit button, then yes, this would do stuff. But in this case, it's not posting anything. It's not attached to any form, so there's nothing to submit. It's just clicking and nothing else. So, but yes, if you had a form, you would have event prevent default in your handler. Okay. All right. That is our talk on the midterm